Okay, is everybody okay? All right. We're going to continue this debate, and we have 5 questions for each candidate. They are random questions, not necessarily logically tied or anything to one another. It's just a random questions. And each one will have 5 minutes to answer, the 2-minute rebuttal. And there will be no mercy on time here because it will be 5 minutes and that's it. Okay.
20-second warnings.
When it's 1 minute, I'm going to tell you 1, so you know you have 1 minute, right? And then, or if you watch Steve, he can raise his hand and tell you, you know. Yeah. But then as soon as he tells me this sign, I'm cutting you off because otherwise it will be too long, okay?
No worries.
All right. Question number 1 for Steve Pidgeon. According to Psalm verse 1045, the earth was established on its foundation, so it can never be moved. How do you explain this particular verse in view of your belief that the earth is a rotating globe?
Don't start the clock yet, I haven't started talking. Yeah, Psalm 104:5 is again one of those passages that deals with really 2 concepts. One is foundation, of course, and the other is shall not be moved. And that is one of those verses that has this phrase, Tebel Bal Tamot, in it. And so what you see is, number 1, the foundation of the earth. Actually, I think Psalm 104:5 does not use the word yasad, it uses the word makon for foundation. But in any respect, what you see there is Tebel Bal Tamot could generously be used to say the globe, lest it is moved from its course. Now, so much of what we talk about here in terms of what's being said is, does this tamot mean just not moved or not moved out of its course? And if it's not moved out of its course, that means it has a course, and that course, of course, would be the orbit. And so if it's in orbit, then it cannot be moved out of its orbit. Now, I think that scientifically that's a fact. If it is moved out of its orbit, it gets moved out of the solar system. That doesn't mean it can't move along side to side within its orbit, because its orbit is not a pure circle as originally conceived, but rather it's an elliptical circuit, and even then it has out of roundness that is not easily defined. We'll talk about this more when we get to the question on Joshua's long day, which I'm sure we'll get to. But in terms of foundation, again, remember, foundation is the cumulative joining of the founding. So when you're talking about the founding of the earth, can it be moved out of its course? And again, another meaning could be, when you're talking about the 7 days of creation, are those 7 days of creation out of their course? No, this is not the case. But in all 4 verses where you see Tebel Bal Tamot, you have exactly the same issue. Does it mean shall not be moved, as in it's sitting here and is not moving at all? Or does it mean that it's not moved out of its course? And that's the position that I'm taking, that in fact the passage does mean not moved out of its course, totally consistent with both the heliocentric model and with a spheroidal model of the earth moving in an orbit around the sun. I'll reserve whatever minutes I have left.
Well, in my opinion, I take it for what it says, and it seems to me that it is very clear that the scriptures say that the earth is established and does not move in any manner. And also, there's no other verses in the biblical or extra-biblical materials which affirm such motion to the earth. Enoch describes in the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries that it's the sun and the moon, as it says in Psalms 19, and the other stars and luminaries which move in circuit above the earth. And again, I don't see any motion, even visually,
what we observe with my flag. The Earth is not moving, especially not at 1,037 miles an hour, faster than a bullet, and also that of the speed of sound.
We were great on time in here, so let's see. Question for Zen. How does flat Earth adjust for tides and tidal flows? This is a geographical question.
In my newest book, Paradise, I describe how at the very center of the Earth's plane, there is what is referred to in the scriptures as the bottomless, the abysmal chasm. And it talks about that there's this magnetic mountain called Rupes Negra, which means black rock. And then surrounding this is a vortex, which leads into the interior of the Earth. And it describes that every 6 hours, the course, the motions of the tidal rhythms reverse back and forth, so that it at one point sucks all the waters of the ocean and drops them in waterfall into the interior of the Earth. And then 6 hours later, it spews them out. And so, in my opinion, rather than the moon causing this, supposedly according to its gravitation, this tidal effect, the ancient explorers, and I explained this in great detail in my book, talking about this bottomless pit, this abysmal chasm. It is this particular phenomenon. It's also described in the Greek mythology as a sea monster called Sharbertus, and it's described as a giant whirlpool. And in my opinion, this is what is causing the tidal rhythms. And when it spews it out, it causes the high tide. 6 hours later, it sucks all the waters of the ocean in, and that causes low tide. And it does this over the course, twice, in cycle twice a day.
Stop the timer. We need one of those hourglasses with the sand in it. Then to do it scientifically, when the sand runs out, you have a little electroshock here at the bottom. You've gone over.
Yeah.
Yes.
God bless the brother that bought these batteries.
Right?
You were done, Brother Zen?
Yes.
Okay. Would you like your time for rebuttal?
Yes, I would. Well, I think that the model that we currently have, talking about tides being formed by the moon, is a very good model, showing that the moon orbits, and that what you have is you have basically a pulling when the moon gets within close proximity, the water falls back, and then it has one reciprocal. And we see that as the tidal model. But with the time model, we have a real difficulty with the flat Earth theory. Because the flat Earth theory postulates that the sun is rotating inside of a closed firmament, which is a dome over the Earth, and that you have the sun and the moon rotating. And there's a whole bunch of problems with that theory. And one of them, which is the solar eclipse, especially if the sun and the moon are the same size. But where we really run into a problem is we know, and it can be proved empirically very quite easily, that the city of Kaanak, which is a city in Greenland, and it's on the northern end of Greenland, is in the same time zone as Cape Horn in South America. And so you've got a real issue here, and it's like the international date line runs North Pole to South Pole, and similarly you have the same idea with the sunlight. Now that is consistent with a spheroidal Earth that a sun is shining on, and lighting up from pole to pole. As for instance, when you look at the moon and you see a sliver moon or a quarter moon, you'll see that that curvature goes from the top of the top pole of the moon to the bottom pole of the moon, demonstrating that the light is reflecting upon what is a spheroidal moon. And you have a similar circumstance on the Earth, that you can see that we're getting a spheroidal illumination from the sun, because the time zone goes from the North Pole to the South Pole.
Question for Steve. Question for Steve. If this Earth is rotating, which causes the sun to set, why did Yahweh give Joshua the authority to stop the sun and the moon and not the Earth and the moon?
This is a great question, and I knew this question was coming, and I'm just going to kind of explain my theory on it. What we see when we look out and we say the sun in its circuit, which David refers to, and Hanok refers to, the sun in its circuit, whether the earth rotates around the sun or the sun rotates around the earth, to us the perception would be exactly the same. In other words, if you and I walked out in this parking lot, and I started walking around you this way, at some point I'm going to be to your right. But if you started walking around me, at some point I'm going to be to your right. And so the perception is exactly the same, whether the earth rotates around the sun or the sun rotates around the earth. Now, when I was arguing this, when I looked at this initially, Galileo is the one that made this argument in front of the Pope. And he was imprisoned and died and spent the rest of his life trapped in his house because he postulated that the earth rotated around the sun. And his proof was that there are phases, like moon phases, on Venus and Mercury. That is to say, you see a dark Venus and you see a full Venus, which would be consistent with Venus and Mercury orbiting around the sun. So in Joshua's long day, as I mentioned before, if you're driving on the freeway, you could be pretty close to the dotted line here, you could be in the middle, or you could be towards that line over there. And I believe that the earth was pushed from a 364-day orbit around the sun and pushed out to a 365-day orbit. And if you calculate that, you will see that that does reflect, in fact, a 12-hour delay in the time. On Earth, it would perceive as the sun standing still, because the Earth is being pushed out in its orbit. But as it's being pushed out into its outer orbital sphere, you would see it as the sun standing still. But we know that there was an anomaly that went from Enoch and Jubilee saying a 364-day year to where we are now at a 365-and-a-quarter-day year. We know there's an anomaly, because if you stay on the 364-day year, you'll be 30 days off in 30 years, and in 90 years you'll be planting your corn in December. So we know that there's an anomaly there, and that anomaly, I believe, took place in Joshua's longer day and was actually attuned when you get to the Hezekiah sundial rolling back.
Brother Zen, would you like your time to rebut?
Yes.
In my opinion, again, the earth is not moving, and this has been verified by scientific experimentations by Morley, Gale, Sagnac, Airy. All of them affirm that there is no motion to the earth. In 1 Clement, he says, "The heavens are moved by his direction and obey him in peace. Day and night accomplish the course assigned to them by him without hindrance one to another. The sun and the moon and the dancing stars, according to his appointment, circle in harmony within the bounds assigned to them." And so the reason Joshua was given authority over the sun and the moon is, again, because it's not the earth which circling and orbiting or moving.
Microphone farther down in the base. That might work there.
Like this?
For the broadcast.
Okay, sorry. All right, and so it's because the earth is not moving, and that's why the sun and the moon circling above the face of the earth, that's why Joshua was given authority over the sun and the moon to stop them. And the same thing with the book of Enoch, the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries. Enoch describes the sun and the moon and the other heavenly luminaries having motion. There's not one verse, not one passage attributed to the motion of the earth, as it says in the Bible that the earth is established, that it shall not be moved.
Question for Zen. How does flat earth explain water currents like the Gulf Stream and air currents like the jet stream?
The air currents and also the wind currents, the jet streams, when you look at the way that the earth is laid out as a disk, we see that when the sun moves back and forth, as is also described in the book of Enoch, between the Tropic of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer, as it goes over the topography of the earth, where the heat and the temperature rises, it causes the winds and the airflow to change, and that's what drives storm production, the creation of rain, the pushing of the storms across the different topography all over the face of the earth. And we can see this even with the description of the sun moving through the 6 gates of heaven, that even the seasons change. That when the sun is located above the equator, we have equal day and night, and as it moves closer towards the Tropic of Cancer, that is in the northern latitudes, summer. And then when it moves back southward after the summer solstice, once it reaches the equator again, that is when the autumnal equinox happens. We have equal 12 hours a day, 12 hours a night. It moves into southern latitudes. That is winter for us because the day is getting diminishing, the night is getting longer, but that is also summer and spring for the southern latitudes. And so we see this reflected, and Enoch talks about this in great detail. I deciphered this and published it as my 9th book, The Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch. You can find all of that in great elaboration within that book.
Would you like your time to read that?
Yes, please. Well, I see this discussion on the luminaries in Enoch as being consistent with the axial movement of the earth. And again, when we say that if you were to look out, seeing the sun orbiting around the earth gives the exact same appearance to we on the earth as the earth orbiting around the sun. We have an interesting situation that when Enoch talks about the 12 gates, it's very clear that the sun is moving up and then moves back to the vernal equinox and moves below and moves back to the equinox. But in that series and in that progression and in the gates of the moon, we have a similar discussion, all of which really describe what is going on with an earth moving. Now let me just share this with you. When we talk about time, for instance, time exists only because we have something in motion affixed to something else. If there was no motion, there would be no time. And we have a very interesting problem with what we see in the flat earth model with the sun orbiting inside the firmament, because really we don't have any solid equation for what is a year other than to say this is the anniversary of where the sun has appeared once before in its circuit. We have an interesting anomaly that when you say, even though the sun has moved up and is creating summer in the northern hemisphere, again consistent with the axial movement of the globe, where the globe leans this way towards the sun or away from the sun, with that axial movement, that's a very interesting anomaly because, again, you see the time zones remain consistent from North Pole to South Pole, even in that axial motion. So even when you're having a change in the seasons, if I'm in the same time zone in Anchorage, Alaska as somebody is in the Fiji Islands, even if I'm in the middle of winter and they're in the middle of summer, and it's going to be something like that unless it's right up in the equator, it's consistent with the idea of the Earth rotating. the Earth rotating in space and moving at 1,000 miles an hour, it's moving against nothing. It's not, there's no pressure there to create these windstorms or something. It's a discrete system. In other words, if I had a ball that was completely enclosed in glass, and I took it and I spun it in a pool, the water outside the pool is not going to cause any distortion inside that which is inside the glass. See, I could spin it all day long, and my little globe model of Seattle with the Space Needle isn't going to be affected by that at all.
Question for Brother Steve. If Earth is a globe, how it is cited in Scripture as having 4 corners?
Oh, yes. The 4 corners question. I love this question. I was going to get to it in the PowerPoint, but I ran out of time because I was too long-winded. This discussion of 4 corners, the phrase in the Hebrew is arba kanaf, kanaf. And I've written a long blog about this on the separate website. You can see it where I talk about this, and I actually created a table to graph it out. Kanaf actually refers to the wings, like the wings of a bird. And this becomes really important, like when you talk about, in Daniel, there's prophecies about the ends of the temple, right? And it's talking about the kanaf on the wings, right? On the wings. And it's so much associated with wings that in some cases it's translated as feathered. So the vast majority of the time that the word kanaf appears, it appears as the ends of a wing, the tip of a wing. And so you're talking about the 4 wings of the earth. Now, does this mean that the earth is suspended on wings in the firmament? You know, in Job it says that the earth hangs on nothing, hangs on nothing. And when you look at this, when you look at the idea of the 4 wings, what you're talking about, and what I believe Isaiah was talking about when he's talking about the 4 corners, he's talking about north, south, east, and west. And he's basically, what he's trying to say is from the farthest north, from the farthest east, from the farthest west, and from the farthest south, not 4 corners. And of course you have a problem when you say the earth is a circle like a disc and not a square, that you don't have 4 corners on a disc, right?
Would you like your time, brother?
In my opinion, the true orientation of the earth is well known by the elites, and one of the depictions of that we can find on the flag of the United Nations, where it shows the earth circling around the northern plane. But I also believe that the whole symbology of the square and the compass is connected to the fact, as it says in Proverbs, where when he set a compass upon the face of the depth, that the square, the circle of the earth was inscribed upon a square. And so that the square and the compass is also symbology of the fact that the circle was inscribed upon the square, which would explain the 4 corners in the Bible, and also Isaiah 40, the description of the circle of the earth. Understanding the real orientation, and that the elitists know this, and that's why they show and depict it in their symbology, that it helps us to decipher the true meaning of what they are hiding in plain sight.
Question for Brother Zen. Is the moon a disk and the sun a disk, or are they spheres?
They are described in the scriptures as orbs. And so I think, really with all of us learning and having to reconsider all that we thought we knew, most certainly further examination needs to be applied to these things. But there are also videos and people that have done videos where they've captured
luminaries and stars being seen through the moon. And so whether that's true or not, I don't know, but there's a lot to reconsider since this is such a huge paradigm shift for all of us. And questions like that, and even things with in the Rahu and Ketu and what Enoch calls the lesser moon and its connections to the lunar eclipses, all those kind of things have to be reconsidered, and we're still learning a lot. But and so this is one of those kind of things that we really have to examine further and open our minds to just learning more to get further clarity on this kind of issue and many others.
Well, I do like your answer on that, Zen, because I do think there is a lot to be learned, and I don't think we have the answers. I don't think we have all the answers in any respect. And I think as we explore, and one of the things that Zen mentioned in his opening remarks is about the distrust of NASA. And I have a great distrust of NASA myself. I just, the government lies to us. It's a given, and they get paid to do it. And now it's really nothing but disinformation. So it's a huge problem. I want to congratulate the Flat Earth people for taking the time to make what we in the legal business call a collateral challenge on existing knowledge. It's good to make a collateral challenge. Now, I think that we have very clear and obvious evidence that the moon is a sphere, because you see it in the sliver moon, in the quarter moon, etc. We know it's at least round when you see the full moon, but you know when you're seeing the sliver moon that you have this reflection that goes from north to south. And the inferences, and it's a readily identifiable model, you can do it at home if you want, where you can take a ball and you can circle it around a lamp, and you will see that the ball in a dark room, maybe using a certain kind of bulb, you'll see that the backside of the ball darkens up as it comes around, and depending on your perspective, that you're going to get illumination from the north to the south pole. So it infers the sphere. Is it a reflection? Is it something we can see through? Is it something else? Could be. Some people have said that it's a man-made satellite that's thin and it rings like a bell. I mean, I've heard a lot of theories on the moon, right? But I believe we can see with the visual evidence that it is in fact spheroidal. And in addition, we can also see this with the sun by calculating what it is that orbits around the sun, which means you can do it with your own home telescope, although you gotta be careful looking at the sun, right? But you can see the orbit of Venus and the orbit of Mercury around the sun. You can't see a moon phase on Jupiter or Saturn because of what they call a superior orbit that's, say it's outside the Earth's orbit. That's why you don't see any moon phases there. And this is why you get the conclusion that you got from Galileo and you got from Copernicus and others, that in fact it's a heliocentric model. Now bear in mind that Pythagoras and even Isaac Newton were geocentric modelists, right? Both of those guys held to a geocentric model. But Galileo and Copernicus and others moved into a heliocentrism. And the heliocentrism now has a great deal of capability in predicting the location of stars, the location of planets, the locations of comets, the performance of a comet as it comes around the sun, and so on and so forth. And predictability is one feature we can look to make a determination as to what in fact is the case.
Brother Steve, does the Bible say that the sun and moon move in a circle about the face of the earth?
Yes, David says it and Hanok says it. And again, I mean, I will come back to this because when you're talking about this, saying that it moves in a circuit above the earth, in our perception, that's exactly what happens. Does that explain the geophysics of what's going on? Maybe, maybe not. If you recall, and I talked about this with on NYS TV the other day, when you go back and look at Egyptian hieroglyphics, you'll see that the Egyptian hieroglyphics are very two-dimensional, right? You look at people on the wall, they're very two-dimensional. But as you begin to move past into the Greek culture, you start to see three-dimensional art emerging. And the three-dimensional arc begins to show depth and the depth perception, and we see more of that as we get farther and farther into the artwork. Well, the artwork is only explaining what's happening in our minds. And so if you take somebody who has a two-dimensional view of the world, they see the world in two dimensions. When you begin to explain three dimensions, it's possible to see three dimensions. Salvador Dali did a painting of Mashiach on the cross, depicting it in four dimensions. Now, is it a four-dimensional shot? No, but it attempts to depict four dimensions. And so when we see this, when you're talking about what the scripture says about the circuit of the sun, if the earth is orbiting around the sun, or if the sun is orbiting around the earth, to perception of man, it's the identical appearance. We perceive it the same. Whether it's one way or the other, we would perceive it the same. If the earth was orbiting around the sun, or the sun orbiting around the earth, we would see it the same. The question is, does the geocentric model answer the questions about the significance of the universe? And because one of the critical issues we see is the sun and the moon the same size? Again, it says so in Enoch. The sun and the moon are the same size. But we're going to have a solar eclipse here on August 21st. Now, if the sun and the moon are the same size, then they would collide. For the moon to get in front of the sun implies that to some degree, the sun is bigger than the moon, and the moon is smaller than the sun. Even if it's just by a couple of feet, that implication is there. One is behind the other. And if one is behind the other, how far behind? And if one is bigger than the other, how much bigger? And if we were to do a scalar model like this, where we put a point, 4 points, and scale it out, well, it could be 90 million miles. Could be. And given that the pyramids predict that it's 90 million miles, and the pyramids predict the circumference of the Earth, and the pyramids predict the distance of the moon, maybe NASA used the pyramids to get its number. I don't know. But I think we can see that although Enoch tells us the sun and the moon are the same size, and we look and we see they are the same size, they can't be the same size in a discrete system, or they'd hit together.
With regard to the sun and the moon, Enoch also describes that the lower heavens beneath the vaulted dome, that they are divided into 7 concentric rings. And he describes that the 7, what are called the planets of the universe, are the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And he also attributes that each one of them is on a different level of what is the 7 concentric rings. And so if the sun and the moon are on these different levels and looking upward, we see them cross, right above one and the other. And we're looking upward, they wouldn't hit each other, but they would, crossing past, we would see them as eclipsed in such manner. Now, with regard to the circular movement and course of the sun, there's a phenomenon called the midnight sun, where the sun, when it reaches the summer solstice and is near the Tropic of Cancer, if you are anywhere near these extreme northern latitudes, you can watch the sun over the course of multiple days go from east to west and then back in a circle to the east. And for 72 hours, it will remain above the horizon and not ever dip down below any of the moons or anything that might obstruct its view. And so you can clearly see every year that the sun is moving in a circular movement, and you can't explain that away according to the heliocentric model, because if it's the Earth which is spinning eastward, and that's what causes the sun to rise and to set, the sun could never take a position where it's moving back towards the north and returns back to the east in circle to reach its point of origin. And so, in my opinion, the only way that this phenomena can be explained, and which is observable every year, is to apply it to its circular motion, as Clement and Enoch and so many others convey. Even Psalms speaks about the sun moving as a bridegroom in a circuit.
Brother Zen, how do you explain time zones which are longitudinal across the proposed globe?
Once you understand how the sun is moving and the moon is moving in a circle above the earth, and that the earth is like a giant flat disk, Auguste Piccard described it as a flat disk with upturned edge. Every 15 degrees of the 360 degrees, that creates like a pie, like the slices of a pizza. These are what create the time zones. And so as the sun is circling and moving through, because when it rises in the east, it moves across the southern skies towards the west, reaching the vanishing point, it disappears and looks like it sets according to our perspective. And then it describes it moving northwards and back to the east. And so it will be nighttime for us, but then daytime for the other half of the other portion of the earth. And so when you divide the pie into these different divisions, that's what creates the time zones. And also it's the same thing for circumnavigation of the earth. They are just moving in a circle around it rather than going around it as if it was a sphere. And so people can look to the model. Even our friend Rob Skiba created with the stellarium by applying the motions that are attributed to this in stellarium to the movements of the sun and the moon. He shows us, and I decoded this with the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries, exactly how this is occurring, and that the sun, as it moves into the southern latitudes, it has to speed up in order to maintain equivalency with one 24-hour day. And as it is moving northward and closing near the Tropic of Cancer, it is moving slower in rotation, which is also in the Arctic summer, the sun moves very slow, and it causes just a tremendous amount of changes. Everything grows really quickly during that time. All the trees and the mosses, everything comes into bloom. And it is during that time that all the creatures there in the Arctic have their breeding season. And again, you can witness this with the midnight sun phenomenon.
Well, I believe that this microphone is kind of intermittent here. Hold on here a second. Okay, I believe that the question is better answered with the global model, and I think it is better answered with the global model in this respect. That when you have the axial movement of the Earth, the axial movement being that the pole moves this way and moves this way, and that this takes place over a period of a year, and the year being calculated is the anniversary when the Earth completes its orbit around the sun and arrives at the same position, which is I think a good reason to have a year. Having grown up in Alaska, I can tell you I've seen the midnight sun, and in the midnight sun, and Zen is right, in the growing periods, the things grow significantly, but they grow significantly because you have 16 hours, 18 hours, 20 hours, and sometimes 24 hours of daylight. And so and also that they're sitting in volcanic soil too also helps. But so when you're talking about this, when he says the sun speeds up when it goes around the outer perimeter of the Earth, well, it would necessarily have to do that. And you're talking about something that cannot be witnessed in really anywhere else in the solar system or anywhere else, even in the subatomic space where you see something speeding up like that inside of an orbit. What you do see consistently in the subatomic world, in the quantum world, and also what you see consistently in the observable astronomy is you see a consistent orbit and consistent orbit speed along ellipses. And so when we look at the axial motion of the Earth, ignore the vacuum cleaner in the other room there. If you look at the axial motion of the Earth, this would explain the sun not setting, because when the pole is looking at the sun like this, the Earth is spinning here. The sun is illuminating it this way, and so you would see the sun not go below the horizon, but you don't in Barrow. But when the axial is pointed this way, by the way, there is no sun. The sun goes down in October, it doesn't come up until April if you're up in Barrow. Now, in addition to that, it does predict the time zone compared to the pie chart. My difficulty with the pie chart is that you're saying that somehow the sun's light, which is now no longer spherical, in other words, if we took a laser type flashlight and shined it on a circular surface, we'd have some kind of a beam here that we could move around in the circle. But how does that suddenly become a pie-shaped beam without some kind of a lens being on top of the sun that's going to articulate the light to be in a particular kind of pie-shaped focus? So now we have to have a lens, now we have to have the sun moving at different speeds depending on its orbit, so on and so forth, compared to a model that shows the sun being fixed, the Earth rotating around it, and in an orbit moving on its axis, moving in its axial motion. I think that's the better predictor.
We're going for our last two questions. Brother Steve, if the earth is a globe, how is it that scriptures say that when Christ returns, every eye shall see him?
As lightning is from the east to the west, right? Now, there's one of our brothers out here, a fellow named Gil Broussard, has done a great deal of research on his Planet 7X. You may not accept Planet 7X, and I know a lot of the FE group no longer accepts the notion of Planet 7X. But a lot of his physics go to this question, and I think a lot of his physics answer this question, which is that if you had a Planet 7X come in, if you had some significant electromagnetic sphere that was rogue in its ellipse and comes around the sun and it gets into near orbit with the Earth, that is to say, suppose you had a planet 7 times the size of the Earth pass between the moon and the Earth. The kind of electromagnetic discharge that would take place between the two planets would be significant and huge. And it would be such that there would be electronic voltage, literally lightning from the east to the west, connecting the two planets. So when you're talking about seeing Mashiach come into every eye will see, and it's kind of a similar question when you ask, well, I won't answer that question, but when you're talking about seeing Mashiach, that every eye will see him approaching, you know, the scriptures go on to even say that men's hearts shall be failing them from fear. They shall be failing from fear with seeing what's coming upon the earth. My personal opinion, we're close to seeing this. I think we're very close to seeing this. I think this generation shall not pass away before we see this. And I think that, and I do believe that there is, when you're talking about every eye will see it, all that means is that the lightning is going to appear from east to the west for more than 24 hours, and then every eye will see it.
In my opinion, the reason why Nebuchadnezzar in his dream, Daniel described it being able to be seen from all the ends of the earth, and the same thing applies to the reason every eye shall see Christ when he returns, is because we are all on this flat disc, and upwards is the same for all of us. And so when he comes down from what is described as the north, it is possible for all eyes to see. And it's also the same thing where when he was tempted and Satan took him up to an exceedingly high mountain. It's my opinion this mountain is this Rupus Nigra, the black rock, this magnetic mountain, also called Mount Sumeru, Mount Meru, Mount Olympus, that this mountain does exist in the very center of the earth plane. It's described as the tallest mountain in the world, the highest peak, and that it is also this place that Christ was taken to when he was shown all the kingdoms of the world. And the same thing with John in his description of seeing New Jerusalem descend out of the heavens. In the scriptures, it describes it as occurring in the north. And he also, in that same vision, saw the angel descend down into the bottomless pit. And as I describe in this new book also on Paradise, the bottomless pit is this giant whirlpool which is located in the center of the earth's plane surrounding this Mount Sumeru, this exceedingly high mountain. And it is this whirlpool which causes the tides. It reverses course every 6 hours and it creates the high and the low tides. And that this is the reason why it says in the scriptures that when he returns, just as New Jerusalem descends out of the north, that every eye shall be able to witness, because upward is the same for all of us on the plane of the earth.
Last question. Last questions for Brother Zen. It's a geographical question. How do you explain the moon phases which demonstrate a spherical shadow?
Well, in my opinion, the moon, it exhibits its own light. And the way that it is established is every day it is 50 minutes behind the sun in its rotation, in its revolution. And so as it falls behind, it goes through these different phases. And Enoch talks about this in the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries, talking about the lesser luminary. And I explain all of these movements and all of these phases, because he describes it that over the course of 15 days, it goes from what is the lunar conjunctive phase to full moon. And it shows us, because when the moon is full, it is in the opposite side. So when the sun is setting in the west, the full moon is rising in the east. And so all of these motions are described by the book of Enoch, and it explains exactly what we see as the phases of the moon. And the lunar calendar, which is also encoded and talked about in the book of Enoch, it is connected to also the determination of Sabbath. And that most people don't understand that Kadesh and the 7-day, the 4 remaining 7-day sabbatical weeks, that they are also connected to the phases of the moon. And so this is a very important study because Sabbath doesn't occur every 7 days. It actually is aligned to when the first sliver of the moon is visible, and then the determination of Kadesh is what creates the determination of Sabbath. And so I do encourage people to examine and to look into this as well, because Sabbath is not every Sunday or every Saturday, or even from Friday to Saturday evening, as so many people study and worship and celebrate it.
Well, I'm going to have to address this backwards. In Enoch, in chapter 92:12, it talks about in the latter generation there'd be an evil generation rise up. But to the elect, Yah would give the doctrine, the sevenfold doctrine of creation. And I think the sevenfold doctrine of creation, we kind of discussed about the 7 heavens and the 7 luminaries and so on and so forth. There are 7 words which begin Genesis 1:1. There are, if you look at the book of Revelation, it's 7 sections of 7. You have 7 feast days. The 7 is the number of the completion of Yah. He worked 6 days and rested on the 7th. And I think that this working 6 days and resting on the 7th is what gives us Shabbat. Now, unfortunately, there is a real controversy that's broken out with Enoch Jubilees in the calendar, and a lot of people have said, well, Stephen, you shouldn't have included Enoch and Jubilees in the Sefer because it creates a calendar controversy. It can, although I don't believe it does, and the reason I don't is because those books declared a 364-day year, and I believe at the time those books were written, it was a 364-day year. And I do believe that at that time the Earth was in a slightly different orbit, or a different portion of its orbit, that gave us a 364-day year, and that the Earth and the Sun and the Moon were in harmony with one another to tell us exactly the rhythm of life that was given in the calendar of Enoch, which is a 364-day calendar that's 30, 30, and 31, and that the Moon was consistent with all of those periods. But Enoch goes on to say that they are going to rebel and that they're going to move. And even as Enoch says that time will be shortened, and as Mashiach says time will be shortened, but that's not talking about the calendar year being shortened. Okay? That's not talking about, it's talking about the times being shortened. And so what you see is, I believe that there is a 7-day rhythm to the Sabbath. And people say, well, how do you know what day is Saturday, or how do you know what day is Shabbat? Well, in 165 nations around the earth, the word for Saturday is Sabbato, Sabado, Sabudo, Shabbat, and so on and so forth. Even in Italian, it's Sabato, right? And so you have a question of the 7th-day Sabbath and that rotation, and I do believe that that rotation is consistent with the sevenfold doctrine of His whole creation. And so in terms of the moon, when we talk about seeing the moon, the sliver of the moon and so forth, Enoch describes the beginning of the month as the dark moon, the new moon, as does Psalm 81:3. And Brad and I went through that passage for 3 months looking at this word showing the dark moon. But the dark moon only lasts for 3.5 hours, right? So the sliver moon and the dark moon are going to happen in the same night. And so it's kind of immaterial. But what does become material is that we live in a world that is, I think this is part of what the Flat Earth movement is all about. We live in a world that doesn't have every question answered, and so we seek to find those answers. But for me, the 7th-day Sabbath is a 7-day rotation.
Thank you very much. We have concluded the second phase of the debate. The third phase is what I call the dialogue. So after a 10-minute break, we're going to come back and we have Zen and Steve asking questions themselves. And please just don't go over 45 minutes, okay? They will have dialogue here.